This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Victims as soon as possible inside the three-story building.
It's the business of democracy.
A threat to democracy itself.
No more hate! No more hate!
Can our democracy deliver on its promise?
The United States is not functioning as a democracy. It is functioning as a plutocracy.
What good are elections if they keep producing incompetent leaders?
Trump is still your president!
What good is an independent judiciary if it only protects the rich?
Riots, injustice, inequality. It is a democracy where only a handful of states decide the fate of a presidential election, where unlimited amount of money can go to a political campaign, where cable news and 10-second sound bites help shape, quote-unquote, an informed citizenry. It is a country that prides itself as the beacon of democracy. Welcome to the U.S. Democracy, a reality check. Former U.S. President Abraham Lincoln once said, "Elections belong to the people." He'd be disappointed in today's America. In 2010, the Supreme Court of the United States made a historic ruling allowing unlimited election spending by big corporations on political candidates. This controversial ruling, known as the Citizens United, takes money politics in America to a whole new level. According to OpenSecrets.org, political spending in the 2020 election totaled $14.4 billion US dollars. That's more than twice as expensive as the 2016 election. In fact, the 2020 election cycle saw more spending than the previous two election cycles combined. And among all the money, small individual donations only accounted for 1/5 of the spending, with the vast majority coming from big corporations, the rich, and the super rich. So for average Joe in America, how fair or democratic is that? And if you think big money only influences politics every 4 years, think again. In 2013, I interviewed Jack Abramoff, the most notorious lobbyist in America, and asked him how exactly can money buy power in the U.S.?
Well, the leadership of both the House and the Senate, both parties, Nancy Pelosi, McConnell, everybody, are busy raising money. And the easiest place to get money for campaigns, because these campaigns require money to be able to buy the airtime on television and other things, the easiest place to get money is from lobbyists who have clients who need favors from these guys and are ready to put up the money quickly. And all of the leaderships on both sides spend virtually every evening while they're in this town at fundraisers and other events raising money. So they're all involved in it.
Even if the law said, I checked with my State Department friends, they cannot receive gifts or things that is worth over a few $100s.
Right, but there are ways around these laws anyway. For example, let's say if you were a congressman and I'm a lobbyist and I want to take you out to dinner. Now, I'm not allowed to, in the norm, sit down with you and buy you a steak dinner. But if I declare that dinner a fundraising event and I take out of my pocket a $1,000 check, I can buy you the dinner and give you the check, and I'm perfectly within the law.
Money can buy a lot of things, and chief among them, TV ads and airtime. According to Open Secrets research, Donald Trump spent more than $544 million, or 70% of his campaign, on the media during the 2020 campaign. Joe Biden spent nearly 80%. During the second impeachment of Trump, U.S. media, instead of being the watchdog of public interests, became, as many observers point out, partisan mouthpieces.
You know, the Trump defense is 100% coming from the right-wing media. It's almost indistinguishable at this point what is coming from Fox and what is originating with the White House. And his core lawyers, Alan Dershowitz, Sekulow, Bondi, and Robert Ray, they specifically have been on Fox 365 times just last year.
Republicans overwhelmingly trust Fox News. Democrats most trust CNN. According to Nielsen ratings, 5 of highest-rated cable news shows in October 2021 in America are number 1, The 5 on Fox News, number 2, The Sean Hannity Show on Fox News, Number 3, Tucker Carlson tonight on Fox News. Number 4, the special report with Brett Baier on Fox News. And number 5, the Ingraham Angle on Fox News. You may wonder, how much can these programs contribute to an informed citizenry, which is supposed to be the cornerstone of a democracy?
Democrats today picked 4 carefully curated police officers to testify as the voice of the law enforcement community.
The theatrics were intended to produce an emotional reaction. Logic and facts be damned. God save us from these third-rate theatrics.
But in recent times, clearly, the United States is not functioning as a democracy. It is functioning as a plutocracy. And this is the difference between a democracy and a plutocracy. A democracy is a government of the people, by the people, for the people. A plutocracy is a government of the 1%, by the 1%, for the 1%. And that's what the plutocracy is. And what is actually quite shocking about this development in the United States is that America's greatest political philosopher in the last 100 years is a man I actually met in Harvard. His name is John Rawls, and I wrote my master's thesis explaining the concepts of freedom and equality in the writing of John Rawls. And John Rawls said this in a very prescient fashion. 50 years ago, he said this, John Rawls said this. He said the liberties protected by the principle of participation lose much of their value whenever those who have greater private means, repeat, whenever those who have greater private means are permitted to use their advantages to control the course of public debate, unquote. So if money can control public debate, then money will take over the decision making. And unfortunately, the one decision that the Supreme Court made that was disastrous was a decision that is known as Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission in 2010.
Democracy, the will of the people. But what happens when that will is ignored? Gun violence, racial discrimination, widened social inequality, needless overseas wars, and the worst record of COVID death. In an original 2-part series, CGTN takes a hard look at how democracy is slowly eroding in the US and how that could affect the rest of the world if it continues. Join us for US Democracy, a reality check, only on CGTN.
The widening gap between the rich and poor is glaring. Whatever the race, gender, education, or income, according to the data, if you earn below the 90th percentile, the relentlessly upward redistribution of income since 1975 is coming out of your pocket. Those incomes at or below the median saw little growth over the last 40 years. On the other hand, the top of the distribution saw higher and more consistent growth. By 2018, the 400 richest Americans were paying a lower overall tax rate than almost anyone else. During the first 19 months of the pandemic, U.S. billionaires added $2.1 trillion to their collective wealth. To put that into perspective, billionaires collectively hold 2/3 more wealth than the bottom 50% of all households in the United States, according to the Institute for Policy Studies. And the closer look reveals the extent of the racial wealth gap. According to the Brookings Institution, the net worth of the typical white family was nearly 10 times greater than that of the black family in 2016. America's identity politics fueled division. A recent survey found that 43% of black Americans do not believe America will ever make the changes necessary to give blacks equal rights. When people feel mistreated, they respond. They become more defensive, more us versus them. Race is shown to be one of the most important factors in American democracy. It determines which candidates win elections, which voters win at the polls, and who is on the losing end of policy. These are the key conclusions of the book, Dangerously Divided: How Race and Class Shape Winning and Losing in American Politics. And race is raising temperatures in the U.S. to the boiling point.
Wake up, we all gonna get kettled out here every single day. I feel like it was a long time coming. Between the police brutality, the economic disparity, the wealth gap, and just the underlying racial tones going on in America, it was like a boiling pot. And the George Floyd, it exploded everything.
In May 2020, George Floyd, a black American, lost his life in Minnesota because of law enforcement violence by the police. His death shocked the nation, and his life has become a symbol of racial injustice and police brutality.
It began with a report of a fake $20 bill. At just after 8 p.m., police were called to Cup Foods, a grocery store in a suburb of Minneapolis. They were responding to a call placed by a store employee alleging customer George Floyd had attempted to buy a pack of cigarettes with a counterfeit bill.
Damn, man. Stay in the car. Let me see your other hand. I'm sorry. Let me see your other hand. Please, both hands. Do nothing. Put your
One of the officers, Thomas Lane, pulls out his gun and demands Floyd get out of the car.
Step out and face away. Step out and face away. Please don't shoot me. Please, man. I'm not going to shoot you. Step out and face away.
2 more police officers arrive, including Derek Chauvin. Chauvin and the other officers attempt to put Floyd in a police car. Floyd falls to the ground.
On the ground. I appreciate that. I do.
He lays there, face down, in handcuffs.
You got your
Chauvin puts his left knee on Floyd's neck.
I can't breathe.
Bystanders plead with the officers to stop.
That's stop it. He's breathing right now, bro. You think that's cool?
7 minutes and 46 seconds pass. Floyd is eventually taken away in an ambulance. About an hour later, Floyd is pronounced dead.
This is what democracy looks like.
Show me what democracy looks like.
This is what democracy looks like.
Afterwards, protests erupted and the demonstrations continued more than 100 days after Floyd's death.
I can't breathe. We can't breathe. We can't breathe. We can't breathe.
In August 2020, Jacob Blake, a 29-year-old black man, was left partly paralyzed after a white police officer shot him 7 times in the back outside an apartment in Kenosha, Wisconsin.
What gave them the right to attempted murder on my child? What gave them the right to think that my son was an animal? What gave them the right to take something that was not theirs to take? I'm tired of this.
In April 2021, 21-year-old black man Daunt White was shot and killed in Brooklyn Center, Minneapolis. There's a long list of names and places of the strained race relations. Rodney King in Los Angeles, Trayvon Martin in Florida, Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri.
It just got more advanced. It didn't go away. I think people, when they hear racism, they think of, someone calling you the N-word. But it's evolved beyond that. Like, racism is systematic now. It's in the finances, it's in the education system that I've been in. I've been in New York City public schools.
The world woke up. Finally, their eyes are open to what we already knew.
In reality, not a lot of people like to hear this, but slavery was never over. It just evolved into an acceptable form. So if I create the conditions in your community where you're impoverished, so you have to do crime to eat, right? It makes the narrative very easy, and you just gotta take it. And it was like that every time I got stopped and frisked. I got belittled every time. I remember one time I was walking with my boy. We're walking towards my house. I hear the hammer from the gun click, right? It's a robbery. So what do? Do I run? I turn around, it's a bunch of cops behind me, unannounced with guns drawn. I could have been dead. That's normal policing in America. So when I see the George Floyd thing and people is like, oh, we need to see more and we don't know what happened, I'm like, bro, I experienced that.
The Washington Post began to log every fatal shooting by an on-duty police officer since January the 1st, 2015. Since then, there have been more than 5,000 such shootings recorded. Although half of the people shot and killed by police are white, Black Americans are shot at a disproportionate rate. They account for less than 13% of the U.S. population, but are killed by police at more than twice the rate of white Americans. All men are created equal, says the Declaration of Independence. Yet, in reality, discrimination against the blacks and other minorities remains a problem.
There's plenty of killers on the force. They know it. The guy who killed George Floyd, he had mad incidents. He had frequent incidents on this thing. There's an incentive to keep black people in the position that they are because someone's benefiting off of it. If no one was benefiting off of it, they would fix it.
Many among the minorities, which now account for 40% of the country, feel that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness does not fully apply to them.
The U.S. Constitution guarantees every American citizen the right to vote, but the UN says that is increasingly untrue.
It is almost a tyranny of the majority, where minority's right to vote is being denied in many areas.
The UN human rights expert singled out new legislation in Texas, which may deprive millions of minorities the chance to cast their ballots.
This cannot be consistent with the fundamental values of democracy, and certainly it does not seem to be consistent with the United States international human rights obligations.
The U.S. Department of Justice sued Texas over the contentious state law. Among others, it bans drive-through voting and bans assistance to voters with limited English proficiency. But Texas isn't alone. In the past year, more than a dozen U.S. states have tightened voting laws, driven in part by claims by former President Donald Trump that the election he lost was stolen from him by widespread fraud. The trend has raised alarm among Democrats.
There's an unfolding assault taking place in America today, an attempt to suppress and subvert the right to vote and fair and free elections.
Republicans in the Senate blocked another bill meant to shore up voting rights. Many Democrats view these actions as attempts to suppress voting by minorities in next year's midterm elections, when 1/3 of the Senate and the entire House of Representatives are up for election.
Asians are becoming increasingly vulnerable too.
No more hate! No more hate! No more hate!
We should not have people living in fear that they can't leave their house because they're going to be attacked just solely based on who they are. Stop the hate! Stop the hate!
There was an attack on a woman, a Filipino woman in New York City, Midtown. And watching that video on the news was very hard to digest. He didn't just kick her, he kicked her several times. She was just so helpless. And what was also painful that the doorman in front of that building didn't go out and help her. They were witnesses. They just shut the door on her. Since the pandemic of last year, there was this rise because of the xenophobia on our people. And it was due to a lot of racist rhetoric that was used from President Trump. Everybody thought that Asians were diseased. They stopped coming to our community. They didn't shop at businesses. And that really took a toll economically. But what happened also was there was this rise in anti-Asian hate. People were using Kung Flu, China virus, all this racist rhetoric. They wanted to blame our people because they felt that we brought COVID or we are the disease.
Honestly, decades upon decades upon decades of being silenced, unheard, unacknowledged, and I feel like today is much needed.
This is not a city that should allow to condone this type of hatred. We should not have people living in fear that they can't leave their house because they're going to be attacked just solely based on who they are.
Democracy, the will of the people. But what happens when that will is ignored? Gun violence, racial discrimination, widened social inequality, needless overseas wars, and the worst record of COVID death. In an original two-part series, CGTN takes a hard look at how democracy is slowly eroding in the US and how that could affect the rest of the world if it continues. Join us for US Democracy, a reality check, only on CGTN.
Another fallout from America's democratic process is what many believe to be an excessive ownership of guns. As of 2018, it was estimated that there are approximately around 400 million civilian-owned guns in America. That means there are more guns than there are people and cars in the U.S. The U.S. has the highest rate of mass shooting, gun-related homicides, and firearm suicides.
911, what is your emergency?
Please, my son called me now that there is shooting in Douglas High School.
Douglas High School? Okay, stay on the line for me, okay?
Yes.
And they said it's happening in the school?
Yes.
Okay, stay on the line with me. Do not hang up, okay?
Hands, put your hands up, guys. Please. Put your phones away. Put your phones away.
My name is Patricia Oliver, and I lost my son Joaquin to gun violence.
My son was shot on February 14th when he was inside his school in Portland. 17 people died that day. Joaquin Oliver was one of them. Since my son was shut down, more than 140,000 people have lost their lives because of gun violence.
We've been seeing the higher increasement of gun violence and crimes during COVID. But people's reaction is being, okay, we're having this situation. We need to buy more guns because we have to defend ourselves from this situation, from people that is being aggressive. So what is going on everybody's mind?
You understand anyone that tells you that, oh, I need a gun to protect myself and my family. But some other nations, if you were there, you wouldn't need a gun to protect your family and your loved ones. I think that's a whole sales pitch from decades ago that it's coming directly from the NRA and the gun industry, that it's convincing you as an American that you should carry a gun. They will tell me or try to convince me that I should have a gun, especially after what happened to us. Because now I know that if I carry a gun, maybe I could prevent this from happening to any other loved one, all right? But they say the same to my neighbor and to others. So at the end of the day, we are all purchasing guns to protect from each other. So we're falling into their game.
There is no more impactful thing to live and to go through than losing your kid. So any other thing that we can do to represent that never will be as bad or as impactful in your heart and your head than losing your kid and carrying the feeling and the emptiness every day.
The deadly pandemic that kept people on lockdown revealed stark health and economic disparities between blacks and whites. The numbers show communities of color have been hit particularly hard by COVID-19. African Americans are dying at a rate nearly 2.5 times higher than whites. Latinos and Native Americans are dying at a rate more than 1.5 times higher.
In the United States, the numbers show communities of color have been hit particularly hard by COVID-19. African Americans are dying at a rate nearly 2.5 times higher than whites. Latinos and Native Americans are dying at a rate more than 1.5 times.
It's heartbreaking, it's bitter, it's America.
A fraying public health infrastructure, inadequate medical resources, and an employer-based health insurance system are believed to be contributing to the crisis in the U.S. According to figures released by Johns Hopkins University, as of the end of November 2021, confirmed COVID-19 cases in the U.S. had exceeded 48 million, and the number of deaths had surpassed 770,000, both the highest in the world. While employment is rising and strains on household budgets have eased in recent months, the employment rate remains below pre-pandemic levels. According to the U.S. Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, nearly 20 million adults live in households that did not get enough to eat. 12 million adult renters are behind on rent, facing the risk of being evicted. Some of the progress from late March appears to have stalled.
Democracy's normative goal must be to deliver satisfaction to a vast majority of the people. What good are elections if they keep producing incompetent leaders?
Trump is still your president!
What good is an independent judiciary if it only protects the rich?
They got another innocent man.
So many people who were totally irresponsible walked away with so much money.
What good is freedom of the press, or freedom of speech for that matter, if they corrode societies with divisions and dysfunction?
Fake news allies, those people.
You are not going to steal this election.
Go. I don't even want to talk to you.
What good is individual rights if it results in millions of avoidable deaths in a pandemic?
Everyone in here is unvaccinated. It's so upsetting because people still think that COVID is not real.
It's America, right? We live free.
The deterioration of the quality of democracy in the US and in Europe has nothing to do with China, has nothing to do with Russia. The West externalizes its internal problems if it can solve them. In the end, the problems are still there. They only make their problems worse.
A new debate has emerged. Is the form of government more consequential than the effectiveness of governance? Can the U.S. still claim the superiority and universality of its liberal democratic system? In the eyes of many, the answers are no. In the next episode of the U.S. Democracy, a Reality Check, we'll look at how Washington is dividing the world into us versus them.